Welcome to Hispanic Biz, Stories of Success. I'm Homero Galicia. In this program we interview business owners who built successful businesses, learning from them their stories, their struggles and their victories, in hopes that you find these stories inspiring. Today we're fortunate to continue our discussion with an engineer who built a wonderful company here in El Paso, Mr. Hector Holguin. Mr. Holguin, thank you very much for coming. As we were talking, you had mentioned an influence that you had meeting a Russian who had came. You had been developing this modular way of doing engineering drafting, and you were telling us about this this Russian that inspired you. He had a method.
Okay.
You mind sharing that?
Well, I always admire the Russians are wonderful mathematicians and scientists, and this Russian I'll have to remember his name, but I'll get it to you. But anyway, he came to El Paso, didn't have any money, and he approached me and see if he could do something with us, and we did provide a small contract. But he said, he went around looking for a job, and he walked into this business school and said, I can teach math, I can teach drafting, I can, went on and on. Well, the owner was intrigued with drafting and said, well, if you can get 10 students, we'll go ahead and set up the class. Well, within a year, he had, more like 25 students. But what he did, he would, and I told him how important it is to break the status quo. He started a course and he'd say, we're going to invent, let's say, for example, a ruler, okay? Just a simple wooden ruler. Here's a ruler, and we're going to invent a new ruler. But what he did immediately, he took them to the library to research where the ruler came from, or things like that. So he would teach them research. Then they had to do a paper on what they found. So he taught them technical writing along with the research. They hadn't even put a pen to paper yet. Then they started drawing, okay? And he had them work in teams of 4 or 5 people, which is ideal. I learned that in the military. In program, it's better to have compact teams of 4 to 6 people. So that was his course. He would teach them all the basics of not just the drawing, but the elements of research, technical writing, design, and then taking the project to completion. Well. Without knowing it, that's basically what we do. When we break the status quo, you take young people and you teach them the tools. But then what I like to do is, we always hired people that had already put in about 2 years at UTEP or 2 years at New Mexico State or the Juárez Autónoma de la Universidad Autónoma de Juárez, etc. And we would immediately assign a project that was impossible, and give 90 days to do it, and then work with a team with a mature manager. They always got it done. Why? Because they weren't locked into the status quo. If I gave it to a mature team, they'd take 6 months to a year, So we learned that early on, that you need to constantly bring into a company that spirit of youthfulness. And then what happens, the old guard learns to do the same thing. In high tech, because we survived in high tech for 25 years, the only way you do that is to break the status quo each and every year and innovate and always make things better on a consistent basis. Okay.
Well, here you are working at this engineering firm, Crimmins,
Right.
designing, plotting the development of Cielo Vista and Horizon City. And with your program now, you're able to churn out drawings very quickly because now you've made it computerized.
Right.
In a sense. So you stayed doing this until when?
Well, I worked at Crimmins Incorporated for till 1972, and even though I was vice president of operations, I owned 20% of the business. He was kind enough to say, okay, and so at that time I owned 20% of the business. But without getting into detail, I felt it was time to move on and start my own company. So I did leave in 1972, and looked around. I knew I could do some consulting work. I couldn't compete with Crimmins, but we could do that. pounded the streets to see what we could do. Computers were still, you know, a novelty, and we couldn't do much there. I ended up doing all the data processing for Union Fashion, which was a clothing store, but they had a chain of 7 stores. Very demanding. You know, the stores were downtown and one on the west side, but it was a very demanding accounting system. So we learned to work in that environment, you know, and we had a very tough-minded person running the accounting and the operations, but it was delightful to work for. But anyway, we learned to work, and then trying to come up with a computer that would do that. I was walking near Southwest Title, Hughes Butterworth, who you know, and I walked in and met Hughes for the first time. He said, I don't have any work for you, but I've got a IBM System 3 back there. If you want to use it on a second shift, I won't charge you until you start bringing in, you know, money on it. So we start working on a second shift on an IBM System 3, and that's how we did the work for Union Fashion, along with the computer work. Okay, so we did that for a while, and then I was still interested. I couldn't afford an IBM 1130, you know, and so I looked around for what was available at the time. And I remember that some salesman walked in with a Wang little desktop, a programmable calculator, you know, and I was amazed at the speed, not realizing that it was a core memory. It's the same core memory that you found on the mainframes of that period. Dr. Wang was the inventor of the core memory. And if I fast forward with his career, he's the one that invented the word processor and office automation. He built a major, you know, billion-dollar company outside of Boston and Tewksbury, and then. But anyway, we took this little programmable calculator and it started putting in the same kind of coordinate geometry and the ability to do the design work. Except you have to toggle. You know, it was a beast to work with, but we got it to work, and it was absolutely super fast. So that started when I looked at that and I said, my gosh, we put our whole civil engineering library on here. This is very marketable because this unit is $10,000, you know, and people are doing that. Well, you know, on an IBM 1130, you paid, you know, 100 times that, and the mainframes, of course, would cost you $250,000 per station, you know. So I talked to some people at Wang Laboratories, and they said, well, we will go ahead and look at what you have. And I said, well, I'll come up, but I need to make sure that you guarantee that I'll talk to the director of marketing or the director of sales, you know, because I learned the hard way. If you don't get to the decision maker, you're just not going to get anywhere. So I did make I got an agreement that Roland Bouvier, who was their director of marketing, was going to see me. Well, we arrived, I arrived ready to showcase what we had done. And Roland Bouvier wasn't there, just his staff, you know, 4 people. And right away I knew that I wouldn't get anywhere. You know, the more I talked, the worse it got. So I just waited, and I said, is Mr. Bouvier coming? He said, oh yeah, he made a commitment, he's going to come. Well, I knew when he walked down that room, I better be quick, you know, and get to the point. And so I knew that I had to have him at the first 10 minutes. You know, the elevator ride, you know, I had to get him in the first 10 minutes. Well, he looked at me, and we eyeballed each other. You know, you eyeball people to make sure that, you know, can you trust them? Are they, you know? And he said, well, I'll tell you what. And he walked out of the room with his people, and I said, well, I know his people are against it. He came back and said, we're going to set up a test market for you in Dallas. Okay, so we'll use our Wang office there, and we'll bring in some engineering firms that they can look at this, and that's what we'll do. So I went back to El Paso. It was destiny again. There's a surveyors convention, civil engineering convention in Houston before we were targeted to go to Dallas. Thankfully, we went to Houston. We would have bombed in Dallas. Okay, Houston is a very dynamic city. You know, Dallas is more conservative, and where Houston people are, you know, are risk takers. They just it's just, I don't know what it is. I guess because of the nature of the petroleum industry and all that. So we wound up in this surveyors convention, and there was a young salesman for Wang, Russ Kaufman. They call him the 3-stop kid because he made his quota by calling him, you know, NASA and 2 other large accounts, and then he would take a break the rest of the year. He was very, very bright. He was intrigued by what we were doing with the Wang, so he stayed with us, thankfully, because he really, I didn't know how to sell. I could barely speak, more than a paragraph at a time, without, where he was just gifted in selling. Well, we sold 7 systems, not then, but follow-up. I got ahead of myself. We were leaving the Surveyor show, which was a small show, and we were packing in the room, and my wife was with us because she would, when we stayed over a period of time, if she could break away, leave the daughters with family, she joined me in Houston. She was looking at a newspaper, just taking up time, and noticed that there's a national convention of civil engineers coming to Houston just a couple of weeks later. And I said, wow, and I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, so I called up and said, can we stay and present at your convention? He said, well, we don't allow exhibits. At that time they didn't allow exhibits at these major civil engineering conventions. I said, well, I'm not going to give them a sales, I'm just going to show them what we have and let them just see when somebody's interested, we can contact them later. So they allowed us to do that. And that's where Ross Kupman worked with us, and we sold 7 systems from that convention.
So what was it you were showing the engineers?
Well, we were showing a complete, on that little Wang unit, we were showing a complete civil engineer design package. They could do all their land development, they could do all the road work design, they could do all the earthwork, they could calculate all the lots, all the coordinate geometry. So it was a full-scale engineering program that before I was doing that on an IBM 1130,
So has there been an engineering program designed for computers, the small frame computers, before?
No, in fact, we pioneered the first desktop computer-aided design system. And this was the 1972, 73, and by with Wang, we became their largest technical vendor of software, and then in 1978, they started moving more towards software automation. Remember, they became very powerful in word processing. And by then, Hewlett-Packard was knocking on our door and saying, can you put this same software up on this programmable unit we have called an HP 9845? Nice little unit. It had a little printer on top, and it really was a nice unit. So we said we'd do that. So by 1978, we started transitioning most of our business to Hewlett-Packard. So
what was the name of your company?
Well, at that time it was the Holguin Corporation, that didn't become Accugraph until later. But at the time that we went from Holguin Associates to Holguin Corporation, and because we were dealing with larger firms and they don't want to deal with a small little, firm in El Paso, so we had to pretend we're much larger than we really were.
And how many employees did you grow?
We probably had, at the time we were, probably 1978, we probably had 12 employees. I would do all the sales, I would travel, and eventually someone else joined me in traveling and doing the sales, because we just looped to every major city, but we'd go to the Wang offices. So we didn't have to open up offices. We didn't have to buy equipment because we used the equipment that was there. The salesmen got used to us coming, so they would bring in the customers to come in and see what we were doing. Hewlett-Packard did the same thing. I said, that works best because we don't have to, you can count on us coming every 90 days, whether it's New York or Chicago or Boston and so on, and you bring the customers in, we'll showcase and then follow up and basically install the system.
And you became a close friend of Mr. Wang too, right?
Well, he was just a delightful person. He early on in our relationship, one of his people, okay, we're moving from the desktop, that programmable unit, 720, I remember the name, and he was releasing a product called the Wang 2200, which became the real core for word processing. It had, went from 16K to 64K, all the memory in the world at that time. And he sent me a prototype of it, but it was cardboard. He said, this is what it's going to look like. So I created a mock-up of software, a cartridge, in cardboard, and sent it to him. Here's your first software package. He loved it. So we became very good friends. He brought me up one time, and he had a big office. There was a door, and you open it, and there's a laboratory. So he would just step in and do the research right there with his people. And he said, I want to show you something. So I go in, and there's this huge flatbed plotter, you know, I mean, the size of a drafting table. And he asked me to look at it and see what I thought. And I saw it, and I said, you've got to double the speed on it, because right now it takes 16 hours for you to do one drawing, you know. And if you double the speed, you can get a drawing out in 8 hours. It takes a draftsman 2 days to do that same drawing. So that was just a simple productivity gain of 2 times. So he went in the room, you know, he comes back within the hour, and he's got it working at 2.5 times the speed,
really?
You know.
Wow.
So he was a genius. So he invented the core memory that he patented, and IBM got started in the mainframe business with that core memory. But there was a time you really test people sometimes. There was a person that worked with us, was traveling the country with us, not knowing that for the 2200, he actually took our design and created the software, our software for that machine, you know. And I found out about it, and I called Dr. Wang, and I said, I need to see you. And so I show up, and he had his attorney there, and he had the vice president of sales there. Okay. And before that, so I need to go down and actually work with this product, because you know, and I'd like to work with it before I go up to see you. So I worked with it, and it was our design. I didn't have to look at the manuals, you know, it was our design. And it's the only way to do it, the only way to make that machine work, to make it very modular. So I went up and put the manuals on the table, and I said, I didn't have to look at these, Dr. Wang, because it's our design, you know. And the vice president of sales immediately stepped in and said, oh, no, you know, we did this on our own, and blah, blah, blah. The attorney, of course, you know, attorneys, he was going to, there's no way, and you know where, that he was going to allow this to go on. So Dr. Wang looked at me, and if he had said no, you know, we would have been out of business. We would have been out of business.
Wow.
He said, heck, Mr. Holguin, we'll go ahead and give you everything that we have on this product. All the revenue we've made to date, we'll go ahead and give it to you, and it's your product. So that was Dr. Wang. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. So in probably a month later, we got $50,000 check in the mail. I never had that much money at once. You know, we didn't know what to do with it. So what do? We buy a building. You know, we put a deposit down on a building on. You remember Cincinnati and Stanton? There's a nice little colonial building there. We bought that building to expand our business. Wouldn't have been able to do it if it hadn't been for Dr. Wang. So yes, I maintained. I'd go see him even when we moved over to Hewlett Packard. In fact, he wanted us to be the distributor. We were the distributor in El Paso for selling the Wang laptops and the office equipment and word processing. And he called me up one day. He wanted me to be his distributor for all of Mexico, you know, and that was very tempting. But once you go to Mexico, and you know, it's a different way of doing things, and I just didn't. I wasn't ready to do that. So, but that shows you the relationship that we had to the day he died, you know.
Wow. Okay. So now you moved over to the Hewlett Packard,
right?
And that takes more programming, more robust programs, bigger markets.
Well, of course, Hewlett Packard was, you know, a global company, and remember, we learned early on that let us just loop around, give us total access to your offices, and we'll slot. They'll know when we're coming, and if we need, we'll call people and get them to show up. So basically, we slot ourselves into. I was hitting 3 major cities a week. Okay, wow. 2 to 3, you know, looping around. Then I'd come home and with the family, and someone else would take the loop. So that's what we did for over years. So we were able to very quickly touch the market and became the largest technical vendor of software again.
So what was your product?
Well, at that time we moved more towards computer-aided design. Okay, so we still had the civil engineering product for land development, and you know, and any kind of road work, major highways and so on. That was very much online. But we branched out and started getting into computer-aided design. So remember, this was 10 years before AutoCAD. This was 10 years before. So
you were the first computer-aided drafting design program. You developed that.
Yeah, we were the first desktop computer-aided design system, 10 years ahead of the PC and with Microsoft. So we were doing this, and well, not 10 years, because Well, we're probably really doing the full-fledged computer design on a desktop in the 1979, 1980 time period. But then we moved to an HP 1000, which was a very complicated machine, you know. In fact, the developers said, we tell them, can't you make this thing user-friendly, you know. We may make it cordial, but we'll never make it user-friendly, okay, which means that it was very difficult to work with. Now remember, we're talking about selling to first-time computer users. So that's what I mean by making it user-friendly. So we had to hide the complexity and create a system that was very, very easy to use. And that allowed us to branch out. Now, again, because Hewlett-Packard had a worldwide organization, within the first year we had distributors in 12 countries.
Wow.
Okay. And I had 2 people traveling, again, looping around the countries making sales, because again, we couldn't justify opening up offices because people weren't paying big dollars for software. This was a brand new industry. So we, you know, I think we were charging like $3,500 per copy of our software. And we didn't get anything for the hardware at that time. So within the first 2 years, we had distributors in 30 countries. So we had a global presence within the first, from I'd say by I'm talking about 1980, 1983, before the AutoCAD, before the CAD PC product really came online.
So you had a worldwide market out of El Paso.
Yeah, everything was done out of El Paso. All our people were from El Paso. We never had to recruit people from the outside. Remember, bring in young people and assign them projects, wonderful engineering graduates to this day. And we never had any turnover, you know.
Wow. So
it was
local talent.
Local talent.
So Holguin Corporation grew to what size, and then how did you have to manage that?
We never could get support from the local banks. I mean, you know that story. I mean, that as you go from being a Mexican to a Mexican American to a Chicano to a Latino, and then the Hispanic. But there's no bank financing, so you had to build a business strictly on your own ability to generate revenue. Now, fortunately, I was able to get a $2 million operating line from Hewlett-Packard. They had never done that before. So I was able to use that line to grow the business. Well, at most, I probably used $500,000 of that line, but I had it. You know, you had the conduit to finance and grow your business. I never had that before. So we were able to really leverage that relationship. Then we reached a point where I knew, well, the PC came on the marketplace, and I knew that we had to change to either we tried a PC product, but I just wasn't satisfied with the performance. You know, it was terrible, but you couldn't stop it from the market. So we went ahead and moved to a Unix workstation, which is the most powerful workstation that day. And to this day, many systems are based on, you know, on Unix, Linux, and so on. So we went ahead and decided that I needed to bring in some capital to move over to Unix. And I talked to some venture capitalists. One came to El Paso, but I never got a good feeling. I mean, the venture capitalists, they've got a place, but in my world, you know, they want a lot for what they give you. And then once you spend the money, you know, you're stuck with the venture capitalist. And so I called an individual in Ottawa, Canada, that had been our distributor for all of Canada. His name was Rod Bryden, B-R-Y-D-E-N. One of the brightest people you could ever meet. And when he was our distributor, which was System House, a company called System House, he had 300 people. They competed with Ross Perot, you know, in the EDS in the systems engineering business. So he had 300 people. When I contacted him 3 years later, he had 8,000 people. Wow. In 3 years, he went from 300 to 8,000 people. He said, "Wow, you know." Of course, I don't want to do that, you know, but just the fact that he did that. Well, so when I called him, I said, "You know, here's what I'm thinking about," and he said, "Well, let me come down and see you." So he flew down, spent a day with us. He said, "Hector, I don't want you with me. You know, I want to walk around by myself." So he walked around by himself, talked to people, And then when he finished, he said, okay, I want to fly you up to, I'll send a plane down for you. Fly you up to Ottawa and Toronto where you can see our operation. And there's a company called AccuGraph. We have several companies. One is Paperboard Industries, which is very large. A System House, which had become on the stock market of Canada.